Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Make Monday Matter. I hope you had a fantastic weekend. Hope you're loving life and living the dream. I know that's not a reality for everybody right now that might be watching or might be on my friends list, for those that have evacuated, for those that have tried to escape Hurricane Irma in Florida. Sending you some crazy love today, believing God that He will be your shield, that He will guard and protect you from evil, and that He will prove Himself faithful even in the most chaotic and difficult moments of your life. And this morning I pray that you will find some encouragement as we talk about this idea of how to experience authentic worship. How to experience authentic worship. For a lot of you, you probably had some type of worship experience yesterday, whether that was in a church or a home, whether that was live stream on some kind of website or social media platform. You had some kind of worship experience. And as I think about this idea of worship that we often confuse with a slow song and a guitar, I've often wondered how we can do this best, or what would give this the greatest value or the most significance, or how can I make sure that I'm getting the full experience of worship? What does it even look like? And so we're going to dive into this morning, and I believe that what you hear today can radically change the way that you approach this experience and really have profound impacts on your relationship with Jesus. First of all, we have to lay some groundwork and understand that we are just wired to be worshipers. Before we worship, we're wired to be worshipers. So that means that every single day we're going to worship something or someone. So what is worship? Worship is a response to what has captured my attention and my affection. I'll say that again. Worship, regardless of what that worship is. We're not talking about God right now. We're just talking about worship in general, because we're wired to be worshipers. So worship is a response, everybody say response, to what has captured two things: my attention and my affection. So what has captured your attention and your affection will be the object of your worship. Whether that's a sport, whether that's a relationship, whether that's your job, whether that's your family, whether that's a new iPhone that's coming out hopefully in the next month, whether that is a person that you admire and want to be like. What has captured your attention and affection will be the object of your worship. Whatever that is, you will go all out for. Nobody will have to convince you to do it. Nobody will have to convince you to buy in. Nobody will have to convince you to spend your time on it, because it has captured your affection and it's captured your attention. I love this idea, or this verse, when we're talking about God being the object of our worship. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 17, the disciples saw Jesus and they worshiped. Yeah, they saw something before they sang something. They saw someone before they sang to someone. And actually, there's no reference to singing. They just worshiped, whatever that might have looked like. It certainly didn't involve a guitar, although I love a good guitar and some worship music. If we really think about worship music, it's just an avenue by which we can express worship. If we think about it, a lot of music is worship music. It just depends on what the object of that worship is. You know, a lot of music worships me and what I can get and how I can advance and how I can please myself. That's a form of worship music. The object of that worship just isn't God. Anyways, I love, let's get back to the worship now, the object of our affection and our attention being God. Matthew 28, when they saw him, they worshiped. So the question isn't, will you worship God today? The question is, will you pause today? Will you hit the pause button on the DVR of life, and will you give God your attention and your affection? Because if you give him your attention and your affection, he will become the object of your worship. Now, if worship is a response, what are we responding to? Over the course of my 14 years of following Jesus, of him capturing my heart and attention, there's a long time that he just had my behavior, or at least my masks, that looked like I was playing the part or I was doing the Christian thing. But for the last 14 years, God's had my whole heart, and that doesn't mean everything's been perfect by any means. But over the years, I've responded to a lot of different things. One of the things that I've responded to is music. If the music was hype, I got hype. If the band went into that moment, you know, that moment when the drums are building and everybody, and it's just that bridge that's getting really hot, you know, I would raise my hands. You know, so there's been plenty of moments in worship that I responded to the music. And that's not to suggest that the music's wrong or that it doesn't help in my worship experience. It just means that it wasn't an interaction with the Father that I was responding to. It was the dynamics of the music that I was responding to. There's been other times that I've responded to the people around me. There might be moments that I walked into a worship experience and I wasn't really feeling it that day. Maybe it had been a really tough day, or been a tough week, or a really long month. And I just wasn't in the right place. And everybody else seemed to be. And so I kind of responded to what everybody else was doing, whatever that might be. And then thirdly, I've noticed that I've responded to expectation. Whatever your church culture is, this is just what you're supposed to do. Like if you're in a more traditional church, you might just stand there and maybe close your eyes. You might put your hands out beside your pockets. Or you might, go full on in worship. Whatever you're supposed to do, whatever that means, I've responded to that too. Like, this is how you're supposed to worship, or at least look like you're worshiping. And so I've responded to music, I've responded to people, and I've responded to expectation. But I want to encourage you that there's something deeper than that. If that's, I realized that there was something more to respond to, obviously, that was more significant and gave my worship experience more substance, more value. And so the question is, how do I know that I have had a real, raw, authentic worship experience? And I want to encourage you that worship is about three things. It has nothing to do with the music, has nothing to do with people, has nothing to do with expectation of worship, maybe an expectation of God. But there's three things that worship really centers around. Number one is God's presence. Number two is our heart. And number three is falling in love. I love this definition that I felt like God was dropping in my spirit this morning of worship in regards to God's presence, my heart, and falling in love. Worship definition, you might want to write this one down. A heart fully exposed to encounter God's presence that results in a love obsession. A heart fully exposed to encounter God's presence that results in a love obsession. How do I know If I've had a real, raw, authentic encounter with the King of the universe, how do I know that worship is happening? How do I know that I'm not just responding to the musical things that are going on, the emotional experience? How do I know that worship just isn't about what people are doing around me and making sure that I fit in? How do I know that this isn't just what I'm supposed to do? When I have a heart fully exposed to encounter God's presence that results in a love obsession. I love what David says in the Psalms. Really, Psalms is a worship book. Psalms 102, God says here, come into my presence with singing. So we see that worship is all about coming into his presence. And one of the extensions, or one of the outgrowths, or one of the evidences, that's a good word, of worship is singing. One of the ways that I can worship is through song. In Psalms chapter 16, verse 11, David writes, in your presence is fullness of joy. This is the place that I come alive. This is the place that I find life, and life to the full. This is the place, in his presence. If I'm missing out on his presence, I'm missing out on it all. Because this is the place that I get fullness of joy. Dump truck loads of joy. Some of you need some of that today. And then in Psalm chapter 22, David says, you inhabit the praise of your people. God's presence comes and takes up residence in the praise of his people. I like that idea. I like this idea that as we rest in God, God will rest on us, and we can carry rest into a full day. You inhabit the praise of your people. And then going on into Psalms chapter 103, verse 1, David talks about the heart. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and let all that's within me bless his name. I've included a YouTube link up top. It's a worship set. It's not really a set, but it's more of like a part of the set, a few minutes long, and I encourage you to watch. One, it's good to watch people encounter God for real. Not so you know what to do or what it looks like, because remember, responses can't be formulated or forced or faked, or it's no longer a response. And so the disciples saw and they worshiped. When I get into God's presence, my response might be a song. My response might be jumping. My response might be excitement. My response might be silence. My response might be audacious faith. But the question is, am I responding to his presence with a heart fully exposed that's resulting in a love obsession? Bless the Lord, O my soul. As you'll see in the YouTube video up top, they sing about that idea of we're coming to encounter you. We're coming to bless you. And let all that's within me cry out. Let all that's within me cry out. Deuteronomy 6, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart. I love these worship lyrics. You're awakening us to the wonder of loving you. Isn't that a good definition of worship? You're awakening us to the wonder of loving you. Man, that's sentiment. That's real. That's personal. That's got some serious substance to it. What if every time you engaged God in worship, it was a moment that you were being awakened in a new way to the wonder of loving God? I love this lyric. My soul sings how I love you. My soul, something deep within me. It's not just a surface, superficial kind of song. It's not what I just call Christian karaoke. It's not just a moment to go through the motions. There's something deep within me that's had a real, raw experience with a king, with a savior, with a friend, with somebody who rescued me, somebody who went down into my pit and picked me up and turned me around, and he set my feet on solid ground. There was something real and significant and personal emotional about this. So something deep within me cries out, I love you. I can't get enough of you. I'm lost in love with you. You're all that I've ever wanted in your presence, God. This is all I could ever want. This is all I could ever need. I'm full of joy. I'm satisfied in you. And this last lyric, I don't care what the world thinks. I've found my joy. Some of you just need to find your joy today. Find your joy, because in his presence there is fullness of it, all you could ever want. I don't care what the world thinks, because I found my joy. You see, there isn't a right way to respond to greatness. The only question is, not will you worship today, but will you give God your attention and your affection, and let worship be the response. Thanks so much for joining us this morning on Make Monday Matter. I'm praying that this week will be full of real, raw, authentic worship encounters with King Jesus.